These are deeply troubling times we find ourselves in, not only here in Washington, but around the country as well. Disturbing because of events that have taken place just a mile from here at the White House. We hear of classified materials being leaked to a nation that is not our enemy, but is certainly not our ally. We know of a memo from former director of the FBI, Comey, that possibly, at the very least, in my opinion, would show that an abuse of power has taken place. We also are concerned about the complete and utter disregard for our national security that is taken so cavalierly at the White House today and by President Trump. As we're here at this press conference, our colleagues are upstairs on the House floor signing a discharge petition calling upon the Congress to establish an independent commission to investigate the relationship of the White House with Russia, Russia's involvement in our election. We need more than simply concern. We need the Congress to act. We need Speaker Ryan to act. We look to our colleagues like Congressman Chaffetz. We need them to put the American people first and politics last. I'm so pleased this morning to have with us experts from our side of the aisle to speak about these issues. We have with us Elijah Cummings. Elijah?
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you. I want to thank you very much for your leadership, Chairman Crowley, and you laid out our case very well. It seems like we are learning disturbing new allegations about President Trump, not just every day, but, ladies and gentlemen, every hour. Yet House Republicans have shown repeatedly that they refuse to conduct credible, robust oversight over this president. They do as little as humanly possible just to claim that they're doing something. Think about this. The president fired the director of the FBI because he was becoming increasingly engaged over the accelerating investigation into his campaign and his ties to Russia. He even admitted this on national TV. Yet two of the committees with jurisdiction, the House Oversight Committee and the House Judiciary Committee, have not even scheduled a hearing on this unprecedented action. Our chairmen have issued no subpoenas, not one. Now we have this explosive report that the president pressured Director Comey to drop the criminal investigation of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Last night, all 33 Democrats on the Oversight Committee and the Judiciary Committee sent a letter demanding that Chairman Chaffetz and Chairman Goodlatte launch an immediate investigation into the actions of President Trump, Attorney General Sessions, and top White House aides. Given the gravity of the events that have occurred over the past few weeks, our committee should already be conducting robust and transparent investigations and oversight. It is unacceptable that we continue ignoring these scandals, and that's exactly what they are. We're deeply concerned that the continued failure of the House Republicans to take action in the face of this onslaught of allegations will cause significant damage to the faith that the American people have in the credibility and the integrity of our committees and the House of Representatives. Of course, Speaker Ryan has shown he has zero appetite for any investigation of President Trump, said he appears to have minimized any oversight whatsoever. Last night, our chairman, Representative Chaffetz, tweeted that he wants copies of the Comey memos. He said, and I quote, my subpoena pen is ready, end of quote. The problem is that we have been waiting for months for the chairman to pick up his so-called subpoena pen and use it against the White House. In March, just a month after the president allegedly pressured Director Comey to drop the Flynn investigation, Chairman Chaffetz and I sent a bipartisan letter to the White House requesting documents relating to General Flynn. But the White House completely refused. The White House is obstructing our investigation, covering up for General Flynn, and refusing to provide not a single document, not a single syllable, zilch, nothing. Is this what the White House has been hiding since March? Were there conversations or emails within the White House about the president asking Director Comey to drop the Flynn investigation? We don't know. So yes, I'm encouraged that the chairman sent a letter last night asking for Comey's memos. But we need much more than that, ladies and gentlemen. At this point, it is obvious that we need to subpoena the White House and to demand the documents that Chairman Chaffetz and I requested in March. We also need a hearing with Director Comey in public. When Director Comey held his press conference last summer, announcing no charges against Secretary Clinton, Chairman Chaffetz had him in the witness chair at a hearing before the Oversight Committee within 48 hours. Why is he not doing the same here? Simply put, the Republicans are not doing their job to hold the Republican president accountable. And so it's our job to do so. And that is why, as I close, we need to restore credibility, accountability, transparency by passing this legislation to create a truly independent commission. The American people deserve the answers, and I want to thank Representative Swalwell for his phenomenal leadership with regard to this legislation. And with that, I want to pass on the mic to my good friend, a gentleman who is doing a great job as our ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff.
Thank you, Elijah. And at the outset, I want to thank my colleagues, Mr. Swalwell and Mr. Cummings, for introducing the legislation that will be the subject of the discharge petition to form an independent commission. And I want to talk a little bit about why the commission is so important and what the role of that commission would be as distinguished from an independent counsel and what we're doing in Congress. But before I do, I just want to remark on the extraordinary circumstances that have led up to today. If you look at the Russia investigation through the prism of just one person, it underscores, I think, just how serious a thoroughly independent and adequate investigation and Department of Justice and independent counsel truly is. Let's start back when Michael Flynn worked for President Obama as the head of the DIA. He is essentially fired from that job. Some period thereafter, he goes to Russia with the financial support of Russian entities like RT, which the intelligence community has concluded is an arm of the Kremlin's propaganda arm. He apparently doesn't get permission to accept the monies from RT. He apparently or reportedly doesn't disclose the acceptance of those monies. He becomes a prominent surrogate for President Trump in the campaign. Sometime thereafter, and during the transition, he has contacts with the Russians that he later would mislead the vice president and potentially others about. This results in his firing by the president. The president, as we learned from the acting Attorney General Yates, was advised that Mr. Flynn had misled others in the administration or the vice president, took no action on that until it was disclosed in public. Once the president was forced to fire Mr. Flynn, He expressed no animosity or discomfort with the fact that Mr. Flynn led the vice president to mislead the country. Rather, he was angry at the press for revealing it. Sometime thereafter, according to the president's own account, he meets and has dinner with James Comey, in which Comey is concerned about whether he can keep his job. And in the context of that dinner, the president wants to know whether he's a subject of that same investigation. And the president, when he's asked by the president's account whether he's going to continue during that dinner conversation to keep Comey on, he says, "We'll see." Now it is reported that subsequent to that dinner, at another meeting with Director Comey, he asks others in the room to absent themselves, to leave the room. He then has a conversation where the president asks him to drop the investigation of Michael Flynn. This is the course of the last couple years' events, just involving one person within the Russia investigation. And I think it underscores not only the seriousness of why this investigation has to go forward, but why we have to ensure that it is fully independent, both in terms of our oversight responsibility, but also in terms of if there were laws that were violated, that we have an independent voice and decision maker at the Justice Department making those decisions. The commission brings two things. The commission brings an independent body, completely removed from political considerations, to give the country the confidence of knowing that that body will follow the facts wherever they lead, not as a substitute for what we're doing in Congress, but as an important additive to what we're doing here, much as was the case after 9/11, when the commission acted independently, but also in conjunction with investigations going on in the Congress. The reason why an independent counsel is also necessary is the independent commission doesn't make prosecutorial decisions. We have a Justice Department where the Attorney General is recused, at least we thought he was recused from involvement in these issues, up until he played a role in the firing of James Comey, at least in recommending that firing. And it's not enough, I think, for the career professionals at the Justice Department, who are very good, and I have a lot of confidence in the career professionals. It's not that they're not capable of doing that job. It's that the result has to have the buy-in of the public. And given all of the circumstances I related just in this one case, I think the argument for an independent counsel is quite profound. But finally, one last point on the commission, and that is the commission will have the resources necessary to really do this job. It will have not only the political detachment, but it will have the staffing and the single-minded focus. We are doing the very best we can in the Intelligence Committee, and I thank Mike Conaway for his leadership. But at the same time, both our committee and the Senate committees have very limited resources, and we have a big day job just in overseeing the intelligence agencies. We would tremendously benefit, in my view, from having an independent body that has that single focus and has all the resources that it needs. So once again, my thanks to Mr. Swalwell for his leadership, to my colleague Mr. Cummings for his. I think this is an absolutely essential addition to the work we're doing in Congress.
Swalwell.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam, for your leadership on the committee, and thank you, Elijah, for working with me to write this legislation back in December and reintroduce it for this Congress. I just signed the discharge petition on the floor, and I did it because the cost of these events has become too much for the people that we represent. What is the cost? What is the cost of the president's alleged ties to Russia? What is the cost of the president's alleged obstruction into the investigations that are taking place? And what is the cost of the president's abuses of power in firing people investigating him and Sally Yates and Director Comey? Well, the cost is that our democracy has become a mess. Our ability to help people put food on their table, a roof over their head, and provide opportunity to their kids has been gridlocked and brought to a halt. And the future cost of future elections is now threatened. It is not disputed by anyone but the president that Russia attacked our democracy. They violated our sovereignty. It was an attack ordered by President Putin. It was multifaceted. They had a preferred candidate in mind who they sought to help, and they didn't do it because they were bored. They didn't do it because they were testing software. They did it because they wanted something out of it. They wanted sanctions lifted. They saw a candidate who admired their president, and they wanted to reduce the role of NATO. Now, what does this mean to all of us? The campaign that they ran was quite complicated, but understanding what it means to everyday Americans is not complicated at all. It means that our right to go from the debate stages to the stump to the ballot box and have a free and fair elections has now been threatened. The most disturbing finding from the intelligence report back in January is not what Russia did, but what they intend to do again. They are undergoing a lessons learned campaign to attack America again. And by the looks of Washington today, they'll probably do better next time, because we have seen a failure of leadership from Republicans to stand up and protect this great democracy. Fortunately, 2 Republicans have signed on to this bill, Walter Jones and Justin Amash. But to protect our election systems and the structural integrity that is going to be needed going forward, to make sure that the American people are more aware, we need to have an independent commission. I was hoping, we were all hoping, that this investigation could be conducted by the White House. However, the White House has demonstrated that they are unwilling and incapable of investigating what happened. In fact, there have been serious allegations that they are getting in the way of the investigation. An independent commission would be the most comprehensive way to get to the bottom of how we were so vulnerable and what our response was, to understand whether any U.S. persons were involved, and most importantly, to make sure that we never find ourselves in a mess like this again. It would be a commission of 12 bipartisan appointed individuals. They would have a wide mandate to search and understand what happened with subpoena power. They would also be full-time members, full-time staff, removed, and people of experts in the field of foreign policy and election systems outside of Congress. A commission would also be helpful in depoliticizing what has been occurring here in Washington, declassifying to the extent possible the facts behind the intelligence community's findings, and debunking a lot of the myths that the president has put out there. Today is a courage call for our Republican colleagues. Can they, as we have done with past attacks against our country, can they put party aside, put our country first, and unite with Democrats to say that never again will we tolerate an attack like this? And with that, I'll introduce my colleague from Washington, Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Chairman Crowley, and thank you, Representatives Cummings, Schiff, and Swalwell for your incredible leadership. I join my colleagues today in expressing deep concern on the disturbing news that continues to come from the White House and calling on colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this discharge petition that would allow us simply to get to the truth and ensure that we protect our country and our democracy. The latest information to emerge that President Trump actually asked James Comey to close the Michael Flynn investigation is a new low if it is true. If it is true, it would constitute an obstruction of justice. But the reality is that this president has continued to put obstacles in the way of any real investigation that gives us the information that we need in order to protect our national security and the American people. President Trump's business dealings in Russia, as many of you have covered over the last many months, go back to the 90s and have grossed millions for himself and his properties. He has refused to release his taxes, making it impossible to know what personal financial interests he had that would influence his decisions as president. He's refused to sell his assets and put them in a blind trust, instead continuing to have serious conflicts of interest in his and his family's business dealings. And we also know that a slew of the president's top campaign and cabinet officials have had contact with the Russian government, not a problem in and of itself, but the hiding of those contacts is. Carter Page denied contacts with the Russians until it came out that he had visited Moscow and met with Sergei Kislyak. Attorney General Jeff Sessions lied about meeting with the Russians during his confirmation hearings. And as you heard from Representative Schiff, Michael Flynn, just that one individual in the story of his trajectory, denied discussing U.S. sanctions with Russia with Kislyak until it became clear that he had, in fact, done just that. Unfortunately, where there is smoke, we like to see that there isn't fire, but there's no way to know that until we actually have an independent investigation. 3 denials involving the same Russian ambassador that turned out to be false makes it seem highly unlikely that it's a series of mistakes. The latest events have escalated this crisis to an even higher level. The FBI director serves a 10-year term by Congress, appointed to serve a 10-year term by Congress, specifically so that he or she can carry out independent investigations free from partisanship or political pressure. The firing of James Comey and then the even more unbelievable reports that he may have asked Comey for loyalty and to close the investigation against Flynn are serious offenses. Any time it seems that we get too close to the real truth of learning what is actually going on, we are led away with evasive maneuvers, reckless firings, and unanticipated distractions. Protecting our democracy should not be a partisan issue. I hope more Republican colleagues in the House will recognize how badly our democracy and the credibility of their own party will suffer if they don't put country before politics. History has shown us that it takes bold and courageous civil servants who are willing to stand up and do what is right despite any pressure that any administration in power might exert. Republicans and Democrats across this country deserve answers, not open-ended questions and backdoor secrecy. This discharge petition is the first step to finally finding some clarity to protecting the American people and upholding our democracy. And with that, I'd like to introduce my good colleague from Nevada, Ruben Kihun.
Thank you, and good morning to all. My name is Ruben Kihun. I represent the 4th Congressional District of Nevada. And first of all, I want to say thank you to my colleagues for taking the leadership in this. They have shown strong leadership in this, and I'm truly grateful for everything they're doing on behalf of the people of the United States of America. Look, enough is enough. President Trump's unchecked and reckless behavior is impacting the national security of the United States of America. Unfortunately, each passing day raises new questions and President Trump's decision-making ability to lead this country. His contempt for our country's institution and justice system is flabbergasting. First, he dismisses Sally Yates after she visited the White House to tell them that Flynn had been compromised. Then he went back on his word, something that's not new for this president, and dismissed Preet Bharara for investigating Russian money laundering. And most recently, his suspicious firing of Comey after the director of the FBI requested more resources to investigate the Trump-Russia ties. Now we're learning he shared valuable classified information with the Russian foreign minister. If what's being reported about Mr. Comey's memo is true, then it would seem like there has been some sort of obstruction of justice. So enough is enough. It's time for an independent investigation to uncover the full extent of President Trump's ties to Russia. The American people deserve answers. My constituents back home have the right to know. And look, the last time that we saw an American president act with such flagrant disregard for justice was Richard Nixon. So again, I want to say thank you to my colleagues for their leadership, and we look forward to getting to the bottom of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. I want to thank all my colleagues for being here today. I would just reiterate, the President and the Republicans in the House and the Senate promised to make big changes for America and improve the lives of average Americans. We have yet to see that happen in these first 120 days. And our hope is that we can get back towards an agenda that uplifts the lives of all Americans. We're not here today at this press conference because of our behavior. This is because of the behavior of the President that we're here speaking about these issues today. We're here because of what we know from our intelligence gathering community, that the Russian government was involved in trying to undermine the elections of the United States, and they're attempting to do that around the world, including in France and elsewhere. And as Mr. Schiff has said, they're not done yet. They intend to do it again. What can we learn from this attempt, and how can we prevent it in the future, is why we must move towards an independent commission. So with that, we'll be happy to open up the questions.
Chairman, just to clarify, it is now the official position of your caucus that there should be an independent prosecutor plus a commission with 12 Democrats and Republicans to investigate broader issues? And is part of your decision to do both designed to build bipartisan support from Republicans who may be more willing to see the commission than a prosecutor?
Well, I'll let my colleagues as well, especially those who are the authors of the discharge petition which we have before us this morning, comment. But let me say that I have been in favor consistently of an independent commission, much like the 9/11 commission that was established after the attacks of 9/11, to get to the bottom of this. The American people want to have their faith restored in their government. And I believe that this is the way in which we can accomplish that, help to accomplish that, by the establishment of an independent commission like the 9/11 style commission. And wherever that may lead, that may ultimately lead, and I think Mr. Schiff has indicated support for an independent investigator, if I have that correct. And wherever that may lead, I think no matter what, no person is above the law. No one. I'm not, the president's not. And therefore, that's what we're looking for, is a complete, thorough, and full investigation as to what has happened in the election process, what has happened in terms of the FBI investigation. There's just a myriad of things that need to be delved into and gone into, and that's what we're asking for. I don't know if Adam or Elijah?
One of the things that, one of the reasons why we brought up the independent commission is we wanted a commission to have a group to have the resources, and we also wanted the credibility, and we wanted people to have, the people on this commission to have a long-range view that is protecting our democracy, making sure, as Mr. Swalwell said, letting us know exactly what happened and making sure that there are recommendations that it not happen again. But there's one word that everybody keeps saying: credibility with regard to the American people. With the independent counsel, I think you need that too, but we need something else. We also need to make sure that the FBI can conduct the kind of investigation with the credibility that it needs to do. I agree with all my colleagues. I have full confidence in the FBI, but we've got to make sure that they can conduct their investigation, which I think is the one, again, they have the power to recommend charges, if appropriate, to the Justice Department, and that's very, very significant.
Some of your colleagues, including Congressman Green on the floor this morning, calling for impeachment proceedings to begin in the House. What's the Democratic leadership view on that? And Mr. Cummings, if I could follow up with you after that, please. Republicans are saying that if James Comey had this memo, why did he keep it a secret? And that itself bears looking into. And I wonder if you could respond to that, please.
I'm not afraid of the I word. It's independent. Independent commission, independent investigator. That's what I support. That's also the general consensus of our Democratic leadership. And members can come to their own conclusions, and we don't pretend to stand here and speak on behalf of every single individual member of our caucus. But what I would suggest is that there needs to be a full investigation first. We need to get to the facts and let the facts lead where they may. Whatever that end result will be, first establish the facts.
Yeah, let me say this. With regard to impeachment, I agree with the chairman. We have to have the mechanisms to gather the facts. And they have to be credible, and they have to be robust, they have to be transparent. And so what we're talking about is gathering the facts. But there's something missing here that is very unusual, and I'm sure the lawyers up here will tell you. Normally, when there is an investigation, you don't have the subject of the investigation talking negatively about the investigator or doing anything that might even give a possible appearance of trying to sway anybody. What usually happens, and I've represented a lot of clients, is we say, we are going to work with the authorities. We're going to cooperate. We may say something like, the person is not guilty or something of that nature. But here, what we've had is this constant drumbeat of negative comments and tweets coming out of the White House. What I've said over and over again is I would appreciate it, and I think the FBI and others would appreciate it, if the president would let our justice system do what it is constructed to do. And because I think the other things, basically, they do not help. And so with regard to Comey and the contemporaneous notes, that is not unusual. A lot of times people will create a paper trail for themselves because they don't know what's coming down the pipe. I've actually advised clients to make paper trails so that they would have their own individual notes. And so now it appears that things are coming to issue. He can then go back to these notes, and we still need to make sure that they are contemporaneous, by the way. But if he made notes like immediately after his meeting, and maybe told others, and they saw him or whatever, that is very, very significant. And so the timing of if all of this had never come up, these notes may have been totally irrelevant. But again, I guess, and I can't speak for Comey, but clearly, I think he's just trying to say this is what happened. The president said something else different happened, and he's just trying to present the best evidence he has in his possession.
Just wanted to add on to my colleague. I think we'll have Director Comey come back to the Congress in fairly short order to testify before one committee or another, and I think he should with all dispatch. And obviously, the best evidence of what took place within the White House would be tapes if they exist, as the president alluded or threatened. And the next best evidence would be what the director has to say and what his notes have to say. In terms of whether the director should have reported to someone at Justice if he was concerned about the nature of those conversations, I think that's a perfectly appropriate question to ask the director when he comes and testifies, and I'm sure we'll want to ask him that. But we need to get to the bottom of it. And on the kind of broader question that people have asked about where does this all lead, I think that we ought to keep our focus on finding out the facts in the first instance, and no one ought to, in my view, rush to embrace, the most extraordinary remedy that involves the removal of the president from office. I participated in prosecuting an impeachment case in the Senate of a federal judge. It's a very serious undertaking, obviously, when it involves a lifetime appointment on the court. It's a whole other order of magnitude when we're talking about the President of the United States. And there are, the legal questions about whether the president's intent in asking Comey to drop the case, if that's what took place, was a corrupt or illicit intent in terms of proving a case of obstruction. But then there's the very practical question for all the members of Congress in the discharge of their duties about whether this rises to the level of requiring removal from office. And I think it's a very practical matter. In order for that remedy to be appropriate, the country has to believe that the seriousness of the conduct is such that this president cannot continue in office. It cannot be perceived as an effort to nullify the election by other means. That, at the end of the day, I think is the practical test of that. But because it's such an extraordinary and wrenching remedy, it's not something I believe that people should wish for, whether you like or dislike the president. I think we ought to undertake our constitutional obligations to find the evidence, follow the evidence, and if there's another constitutional obligation that follows from that, then there is. But I think we're a long way from knowing the facts here. At this point, among the most serious allegations are just that today. They're allegations that appeared in a newspaper report, but there are also allegations that will be easily subject to proof. And we ought to begin immediately by getting those memoranda, if they exist, as well as bringing the director and see what follows from there.
Chad, come back.
Why should we believe that this discharge petition would work? There's only been 2 successful discharge petitions in the last 16, 17 years. The House version of the Kane-Feingold and then ex-M Bank a couple of years ago. You can only consider a discharge petition after this ripens for 30 days on the 2nd and 4th Mondays of the month. By my calculation, that would have this at the earliest, provided you can get 218 votes, as being July 24th.
These are
That sounds
extraordinary.
like a messaging vote before the August recess.
No, these are extraordinary times, and people are counting on us to do something about this. As I said, it's about the cost to our economy, the cost to our democracy, the cost if the president's ties are leading to him revealing national security secrets to an adversary. So it's a cost to our national security. So there's an urgency to act. And the problems right now has been that the FBI's investigation and earlier this year, the House's Intelligence Committee investigation had been obstructed by the White House. So our duty as lawmakers to get to the truth has been impeded every step along the way. And so that's why we believe the most comprehensive way to have a search for the truth and to make sure that we never find ourselves in a mess like this is to launch an independent commission as soon as possible.
That urgency,
Yeah.
you can't, get away from these parliamentary mechanics, which would have this not being moved if you had 218 votes till the end of July.
Yeah, this is the soonest that we can do it. If we could do it right now, I think there's consensus that we'd like to do it right now.
Just following up on that.
Paul Ryan, by the way, could do it tomorrow.
That's right.
Quite frankly.
Following up on
Let me just come to the back and I'll come up. Yes. I'll come to you. I will come to you.
The president's defenders are pointing to the Obama administration offering intelligence to the Russians back in June of 2016, particularly on Syria, and then there was an attack on our allies in the area, and there wasn't an outcry from the Democrats on this. There was also the outing of SEAL Team 6 after bin Laden was killed. Can you respond to this as far as why there's an outcry now and not back then?
Well, I think it's one thing if there's a deliberate decision that is made as a product of consultation between the president and the intelligence community. What should we disclose to an ally? What should we disclose to an adversary? What is in the national security best interests of the country? And there may very well be circumstances in Syria or elsewhere where you decide we need to share this information because we want this party to behave in a certain way, or just for humanitarian reasons because they face a real threat and we're aware of that threat and we generally don't share intelligence with them, but it's the right thing to do. But that decision always ought to be the product of deliberate thought and consultation. It should not be something that is simply rattled off in an effort to showcase how good the intelligence agencies are or make a good impression or for any other reason. That needs to be the product of design and strategic thinking. And I think the primary concern that those of us who work with the intelligence community have with respect to what's been alleged to have taken place with the Russians in the Oval Office is that there was no thought given to whether this was appropriate, how it might impact sources and methods, how it might impact allies, and that's the problem. And I find it absolutely extraordinary that you have Vladimir Putin vouching for the President of the United States about a meeting that took place in the Oval Office. It's just really beyond belief. And but that's the problem. It's not that it's never appropriate to share information. We share information, where we have a strategic interest in doing so, and it doesn't appear that there was any strategic thought given to the sharing of this information.
Yes.
Well, certainly one of the questions that I would like to ask the director when he comes back to testify, and again, there are a lot of committees that have equities here, so I'm confident he will come back and testify, is, what were the concerns that well, first of all, what was the conversation? Then what were the concerns that raised with you? And then were there other conversations that will shed light on what the president's intentions were here that may have also been of concern to you that you memorialized in writing? And then if you were worried about this, did you report it to anyone at Justice? What steps did you take? Why didn't you inform Congress, or why didn't you inform Congress about this? These are all, I think, very appropriate questions that the Congress ought to be asking.
You mentioned the 9/11 Commission as a model. The 9/11 Commission was authorized by Congress in November of 2002. Commissioners had to be appointed, staff was hired, hearings were held. It didn't produce its final report until the summer of 2004. Really 2 years. Given the urgency that you mentioned on this and the gravity of the allegations, do you really want to wait that long to have a resolution of these issues?
We would have liked this to have been done yesterday. And, I'll let the ranking member put into perspective the resources that we have on our committee compared to what the September 11 Commission had. That committee had over 100 full-time staff devoted to getting to the bottom of what happened. Here, we're talking about a crime that Russia carried out that it looks like, took place over a long period of time, involves foreign witnesses in multiple countries. It's going to involve getting to the bottom of electronic communications and complicated financial transactions. And so just because, we're not doing it as soon as we'd like, it doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to make sure that in the 2018 election or the 2020 presidential election, that we don't do all that we can to improve the structural integrity of our election systems and also just the overall awareness that the American voter has the next time they go to the ballot box.
You mentioned that national security is being affected, the country's faith in its democracy is in question here. To have a long, drawn-out process that might take up to 2 years seems like is not going to resolve any of the things that you say are urgent.
Well, first of all, it's not that the commission is going to replace the ongoing investigations in Congress or at the FBI. So it's not as if we have to halt everything, wait till this commission gets established, and then hope for the best. Our efforts are going to go on. They're not going to be interrupted. The question is, does a commission bring added value, even though it will take time to ramp up? And I think the answer is absolutely. It'll bring value in that the public will have probably the most confidence in its result. Certainly, if you look at the 9/11 Commission, there's probably no other report that came out of the Congress to rival the credibility of that report. And as well, I would say that probably the second most important investigation is that of the FBI. And that began last July. So that's not a speedy undertaking either. And I do want to caution people about this because we get questions about the investigations and the Congress, how long is this going to take? This is not easy to do for the reasons Eric mentioned. This is going to take time for us. It's going to take time for a commission. But the fact that it would take ramp-up time to get the commission started, I don't think is a reason not to do something that will ultimately provide the public with the best confidence in the result.
I want to answer that.
Okay.
I really need to answer it.
Before
Mr. Isikoff, let me, your question is one that I've thought about a lot. And it's a very good question. And I guess as I get older, I realize that we are at a very significant moment in this country's history. This is our watch. So if it takes a year, if it takes 2 years, if it takes 3 years, we need to get this right. We need to get this right, and we need to get it right now. In other words, my point is that, yeah, it may take a little time, but this is not about us. This is bigger than us. This is bigger than President Trump. This is about the soul of our democracy. I keep saying that. And so if we can put first of all, there was an issue, a question of impeachment. I agree with Adam Schiff. I'm not there. I just want to get the information. On the way to getting the information, keep in mind, this thing started off with 17 intelligence committee organizations of the United States government, by the way, that we pay, unanimously saying there was interference with our elections. So we're going to learn some things in the process. Will it lead to impeachment? I don't know. But one thing is for sure, this is a critical moment. And that's why I say to all my colleagues, we really do. I mean, and Crowley has talked about this a lot. If there was a moment that we needed to leave our party hats outside the door, this is that moment. Because the greatest gift that we can give our children and generations yet unborn is a solid democracy intact, with all of our institutions that underpin that democracy being the very best that they can be, having transparency, having credibility. This is our watch. And so we take it upon ourselves every 2 years. We swear that we're going to uphold this Constitution and that we're going to protect the American people. And that's what we're trying to do.
How is this distracting from other pressing national security issues, in particular the North Korea threat?
Well, I think there are certainly many impacts, but I'll just point to two. And the first is we are very reliant on our intelligence agencies to provide us the best intelligence possible. To the degree that the president disparages those agencies, or to the degree that the president, either with respect to North Korea or any other country, impairs the willingness of other allies to share intelligence with us, that's a real problem. It's a problem in terms of understanding the threat from ISIS to our aviation, but it's also a problem if we're getting insights from other allies about what North Korea is doing, and they have some concern about whether we're sharing it with countries that may have a very different interest than themselves. I think you also have a very serious problem when the president takes actions and the administration takes actions that impair the credibility of the presidency. And we have seen this time and time again. If you have the president's staff coming out and saying one thing, Director Comey was fired because he mishandled the Clinton investigation, and the very next day the president's saying something completely different. Then when the president speaks about North Korea, or his staff speak about North Korea, or General McMaster speaks about North Korea, the world is left wondering, are they speaking for themselves? Are they speaking for the president? Is their story going to change tomorrow? And you know, some people write that off as, you know, this is a part of a master plan. This is the guy that wrote The Art of the Deal. This is a very clever saber rattling with North Korea. It doesn't look like any part of a coordinated strategy. It's not strategic ambiguity. It's very unstrategic ambiguity. And when you're dealing with a erratic leader that's possesses nuclear weapons, having that kind of unhelpful ambiguity, erratic quality to our national security policy is a dangerous thing.
Thank you all very much.